Hi everyone, it's Robert P. Smith from Money Time Coaching. If you're new to this channel, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I promised you guys always to give you helpful content. That's exactly what I'm doing here. And so I decided to attend an event that could help a lot of people here in terms of co-ownership. And this is a way to circumvent the issue that a lot of people face around the world, which is being able to afford property at a higher cost, even though your wages might not necessarily have increased. So, what's your name and what do you do?
My name's Ryan Martin. I am a real estate lawyer. I specialize in co-ownership as part of that real estate law job. I've been a lawyer for close to 8 years now, and I'm just really passionate about getting co-ownership across to the public.
It really means that you're buying property together. Multiple people are buying into a property together or a specific asset together, maybe a series of assets together, and owning it with obligations attached, and also, spending efforts to ensure that they cover off whatever obligations seem to pop up. But this is the way that I sort of understand co-ownership and ways in which we can think about it. And the reason is there are financial implications, there are legal implications to doing things in these 3 different ways. And so we're going to look at it through this lens. Okay, so you've got occupying, hybrid, and non-occupying co-ownerships. Okay. Now, occupying co-ownerships, that's sort of what I feel like we've been talking about here all morning. A big part of it is, hey, I want my primary residence to be, I'd like to get into the market, and in order for me to do that, for my primary residence, I'm likely going to need other people. So in circumstances like this, parties occupy the property together. We, of course, have stipulations on use of that property. Certain areas may be off limits to some parties, certain areas wouldn't be. That already sort of strikes an interesting chord for a lot of people who are thinking about property. They may say, well, that's weird. I'm restricted from going to certain places, but that's what you'll see in a co-ownership agreement. Legal tenure of tenants and common co-ownership established. So this is also true. That's going to be true for all 3, likely, right? We have the right to choose who can inherit the share of the property as well. That's something that happens later on in your co-ownership agreement, yes, but also thinking deeply about where the property will end up if something were to happen to you. Even if you occupy property, that's a relevant consideration. So the second kind, non-occupying, now this is where we sort of see here what Ron was talking about, where we've got a bunch of people coming together. They're saying, look, we've got a view. That's a view to a profit. We want to make sure that we buy into property and we get a profit out of it. How do we do that? We either rent, you may buy, hold, and sell. This is sort of regular realtor knowledge. People know it. Buy, hold, sell at a later date when the property's risen in value. And then with respect to the parties, there are different kinds of organizational structures that make sense. So when I think about non-occupying co-ownership, I really am seeing it through a different lens. It's more of an investment, straight ahead investment, which means you may be able to tap into other ideas, such as partnerships, joint venture circumstances. You set up agreements that aren't necessarily called or thought about as co-ownership, and then you bring in other parameters. You've got the Partnerships Act to contend with if you go down the path of partnership. If you go down the path of joint venture, I kind of see that still as a co-ownership if everybody's going on title. If people aren't going on title, there may be some other considerations there, but joint venture is typically how we see these kinds of structures. But all in all, if people are going to get equity out of it, they're really co-owners. Okay, even if you're not going to be occupying, living in the property. So we want to think about how parties will determine various elements, right? So organizational structure, again, usage rights, allocation of rent, and then operational budget. So what's going to happen to the rent? and who's going to pay for the operations of the property. This is where we're going to look at. Okay, and so hybrid, of course. So there may be circumstances you can imagine where person A lives in the property, person B has bought in as someone that, yes, may have a view to a profit on the one hand, but has bought in and is not going to be living in the property, right? This person is just simply going to buy in with the hope that they can get something out of the investment. So some reside, some don't. You can then, with respect to certain areas of the property, if we're talking about a decent sized property where you could rent out certain areas of the property, likely the non-occupier portion of that property could be rented out. So what you have here really is still some similar issues with respect to occupying, of course. An occupying co-ownership, very similar. Why a co-ownership agreement? We see lots of disputes that come up. Leslie can tell you, Parnell can tell you, disputes come up, people leave, people enter co-ownerships at later stages. This all sort of means that there's a trigger point, and we need to make sure that we're very clear about things like trigger points for enter and exit and specific obligations for notice, if you can imagine. So I know very drilling down on a lot of the sort of the nitty-gritty here, but let's take a look. So first of all, of course, one of the biggest issues, decision making. How are we going to make a decision here? I want to imagine, if you can imagine a circumstance where we want to hire a cleaner to deal with, cleaning the property. I buy a property with my co-owner. The co-owner decides they don't want that. Okay, well, what are we going to do in a circumstance where well, first of all, how are we going to voice our decision on this? What's going to happen? So in order for us to figure out how we're going to do that, we should understand whether we're going to have something super formal. Are we going to have formal voting, or are we not going to have formal voting? Is it going to be formally, we've got to get in front of each other, have a meeting, like a board would have a meeting, to come to a consensus about what's going on, or are we not going to do something so formal? Are we going to have other mechanisms? And you can think about different relationships. People are not likely to want to do that if we've got kind of close relations. It might not be necessary. You're probably just going to call your mom if you want to know if you can do something, as an example, rather than, hey, you've got to have a board meeting to have this happen. So creating a map of issues and outlining how decisions are made, number one, and creating enforcement mechanisms in case of non-compliance. Well, that's what kind of non-compliance? Are we going to put people in jail in the basement? No, we can't. Is that allowed? Maybe it will be. So we got to think about that. Set out benefits and burdens on exit of the property. What's going to happen if you die? And what's going to happen if you get married? What's going to happen? And ordinarily, we know that somebody coming on board, if they're your spouse, whether you wanted them to have an interest in your property or not, they have one inherently under the Family Law Act. What does that do for a co-owner that now owns this property with you? Could be a potential problem, especially if you don't know this person very well. So, decision making, structures of votes. How many votes does one person get? Do people get one vote? I know that we just recently did a co-ownership agreement where everybody was insistent that we gave everyone the same number of votes as their percentage interest in the property. Seems a little, we could just have 2/3, or we can. Point is, we want to make it so that people are comfortable, because certain votes, of course, if you were to, you can imagine if we've got 4 people and 2 want to do or let's imagine it's 5 people, 3 want to do something and 1 doesn't, that person is sort of out of luck. That last person, that's an interesting, I find it to be an interesting situation, given that we're not talking about a profit or a view to a profit is sort of the mission always. We're talking oftentimes about people's primary residence. Someone now in their primary residence can't make a decision about, I don't know, whether they want a cleaner coming into the house, as an example. A little bit different, maybe if you're focused purely on profit. I think there may be an argument that the mission supports the idea. We need to keep the property in good health. But when we're talking about a primary residence, we can see that may be an issue. Majority versus unanimity, right? Probably better to have a unanimous, hey, what do I know? But I think that everybody should kind of come to terms in a circumstance where everyone lives in the property. And then we have tie-break mechanisms. So tie-break mechanisms, one of the easiest ways to solve a problem, and again, I think Leslie sort of mentioned this morning, people may be in a dispute. What's going to happen when they're in a dispute? Are they going to, I don't know, what's the rule? Is the rule now we've got to get in the ring and we've got to fight? What's the rule? It's not that probably, but more likely what it would be is, let's add a third party. Who's that third party? A mutually agreeable third party that can say, hey, I'm going to make a decision, and that's going to be the decision for all of you. Maybe you have a property manager who's come on board to manage the property. Maybe that person makes sense. Okay? Maybe it's Uncle Tim, and he's a good at, he's good at making decisions. Whatever the case may be, it's probably a really good idea if you're in tie-break circumstances to try and get another person on board to help make the decision. It's not always the case, and again, some people are uncomfortable with this idea because now we have a third party coming on board. That really has nothing to do with owning the property and managing it and carrying its responsibilities. That's really what you're looking at there with respect to voting. Exit strategies. So one of the biggest concerns, of course, with co-owning is how do you get out of this arrangement if you decide you want to leave? Well, one of a very sort of controversial approach is fractional sale right now. I would say we're not seeing a lot of that. Leslie is saying that that is happening, of course, but you could sell a share. So in a lot of ways, that's like a company. You've got shares in a company. You're going to sell those shares. Okay. Same thing with the property here. You sell shares in the property, and you've now got a 1/6. Let's imagine it's not usually 1/6, but maybe something like 30% of the property now has to go up onto the market. We don't necessarily have the infrastructure for that, and of course, there may be some things that need to be said about infrastructure with respect to that issue, but that is a possible exit strategy. And then we have the sale, of course, of the entire property. Now you create certain triggers that you would want to have as the sale of the entire property. So when does the property get sold? We have triggers for that. Death, of course, is another one, right? But you've got not ideal. People shouldn't be dying. It's true. But what I would say is, absolutely. I would say, we've got wills for a reason, and that is sort of hand in hand with the idea of exit is having a will that's consistent with this co-ownership agreement. And so if you've got a specific situation, I'm happy to help deal with that in specific circumstances with specific groups. And again, breakdown of relationship, settlement circumstances. I see that I'm getting a bit of a wrap-up sign here, guys. So what I want to do is this. We'll just talk very lastly about some of the reasons why there are concerns for managing property. How do we go about managing this property? Well, one of the biggest issues, or one of the elements that we need to think about, is the fact that if you own property, a lot of times you're more likely to take care of that property. So one of the caveats, of course, is that if you've got the pride of ownership element happening, you're likely to keep the property in top-notch shape. But in the event that you don't, we want to make sure this co-ownership agreement, again, covers things like day-to-day concerns, noise level, managing cleanliness. Where can you eat? Where can't you? Is there going to be a property manager? Are you going to pay for garbage removal? What will happen if you damage this property? And again, it's not just yours, it's someone else's. So you've got to ensure that everyone is on board with the way in which you deal with these elements. You can set rules, regulations, you can have maintenance and repair clauses, and you can also have nuisance and damage clauses. And again, these are very specific clauses. The structure of these clauses will turn on the nature of the relationship among the parties. I'm happy to sort of address questions on these issues. So, that's all for me.
So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video so much because I had a blast being here and I wish that you guys were here, but technically you were through me. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's event, and please let me know what you guys have to say about co-ownership in the comment section below. See you in my next one.
Subscribe now.